Well, welcome. It's Andrew here again. This is episode 16 and it's day 12 of our national lockdown. Today we are moving into Holy Week proper, and the readings that I've selected are again part of Matthew's account, which will hopefully take us into Good Friday and ultimately into Resurrection Sunday. And so we pick up the narrative in Matthew chapter 26 verse 1. When Jesus had finished saying all these things, now he's been talking about what is ahead, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." Then the chief priests and the elders of the people gathered in the palace of the high priest, who was called Caiaphas. And they conspired to arrest Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they said, "Not during the festival, or there may be a riot among the people." And then we move on to verse 14. Then one of the 12, who was called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I betray him to you?" They paid him 30 pieces of silver. And from that moment he began to look for an opportunity to betray him. It's easy to imagine that these two groups of protagonists are not us, that we don't fit into them in any way, that if we had been there and we'd been part of the environment and the goings on, we wouldn't have been in any way sympathetic towards the religious leaders, and we certainly wouldn't have taken the part of Judas Iscariot. And yet we need to be just a little cautious. This story is intensely political. It's important to recognise that what is motivating the religious leaders is politics, and what is motivating Judas Iscariot, I want to suggest also, is almost certainly politics. They have strong political views, just as we all have strong political views. One of the dangers that we could fall into is imagining, no, we couldn't possibly be one of those. We could never have done what they did. But they felt the same way. And Jesus addresses this way back in Matthew chapter 23, where he says, "Woe to you," this is verse 29, "teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. And you say, if we'd lived in the days of our forefathers, we would have not taken part with them in the shedding of the blood of the prophets." Ooh. So they are sure that they wouldn't have done what their forefathers did. We also need to be cautious in making bold claims that we couldn't possibly have done what they did, even making those claims in our own hearts. We may say, yes, but I have the Holy Spirit. And because I have the Holy Spirit, there's no way that I would possibly do anything like what they did. I wouldn't be too sure. I want to give a contemporary example. And it relates to the world in which we live in today. Although here in New Zealand we are almost on the other side of the planet from the United States, what happens there actually affects us, and we all have an opinion on it. I observe within the Christian church here that we are probably as polarized about the personality of the American president as Americans in the United States are. We all have a view. We all have a deeply held Christian conviction about this man. For a good number of us, Donald Trump is a modern-day Cyrus. He's been sent by God. He's the anointed one. He has been especially equipped and appointed and resourced to return America and ultimately, it is hoped, the Western world to its Christian roots and Christian values. And he's demonstrating that by a commitment to pushing back the abortion laws. Hopefully by outlawing homosexuality, which is a deeply held desire by many of us, and also by restoring marriage to its rightful place of one man and one woman. It's also hoped that he will restore the God-given free economics of capitalism to the States and to the Western world in its rightful place. That is one view held by a large number of us. On the other hand, there's also a large number of us who see Donald Trump as the Antichrist, that he demonstrates in his character, in his behaviour, in the things that he says and the things that he does, in the values that he holds, in the way that he treats people, and the way that he demonises those he disagrees with and who are not like him, that he is far, far away from the mind of Christ. Both groups are equally unsure about the other's claim to being Christian. And there seems to be little room for neutrality on the issue. History will be the judge. And who knows which side we would have been on in Jesus' time? Would we have stood with the conservative establishment and seen Jesus as a radical who threatened to overturn the current order? Or would we have stood with the radical nationalists like Simon Zelotes and Judas Iscariot, who wanted to see the occupying power gone, with an Israel first or Israel alone policy? Or alternatively, would we have stood with the common people who, it would seem, were persuadable either way? It may be that we would thought, well, we will stand with the apostles. And we see even within the apostles a certain amount of uncertainty when push came to shove. And at the Last Supper, where Jesus makes the claim, where he asserts that one of you will betray me, all of them ask the question, surely not I, Lord. And in that they recognise within each of themselves a vulnerability, an uncertainty that when push came to shove, where they might line up. Personally, I have real sympathy for Judas. And when you take the whole of the gospel narratives together, I don't think that he simply did this for 30 pieces of silver. I've become persuaded that Judas was trying to force Jesus' hand. He wanted Jesus to lead the revolution. And he thought if he pushed him into this position, that he would come out of his corner and he would summon the people to follow him, and that the Roman oppressors would be driven from the land and Israel could once again be the free sovereign state that God had always intended it to be. To see what happened to Jesus horrified him. To see Jesus arrested, to see him tried and then crucified and died, was more than his conscience or his spirit could bear. And so he commits suicide. There's different ways of seeing all of this. And my experience tells me that one of the most dangerous things that any one of us could ever say is, I could never have done that. I would never have done what he did. I would never have done what she did. I could never have done or said what he did or said or she did. Actually, we need to be really careful, because, again, my experience is that when we make such a claim, it's likely that we're going to be tested in ways that will surprise us and that could come completely out of left field. The disciples were aware of a certain unsteadiness that they all bore, and in the end, they all deserted him. None of them were there with him at the end. They all fled. And as we head deeper into Holy Week, as we seek to accompany Jesus on this journey, let us each be aware of the weakness, the lack of consistency and courage within our own hearts that we all carry. Let us walk with Jesus with humility and with gentleness, both toward him and toward ourselves. Go quietly this week, my friends. Go quietly.